At some point, almost everybody has done this. You notice a symptom? Maybe it's chest discomfort, fatigue, dizziness, headaches, brain fog, numbness, stomach pain, heart palpitations, or something that just feels off. And maybe at first you try to ignore it, okay? And you tell yourself, oh, it's probably nothing. It'll pass. I'm just overthinking. Maybe I'm just tired. But then the symptoms keep happening. Or maybe you leave a doctor's appointment still confused. Or maybe your labs came back and you don't fully understand them. So eventually you open Dr. Google, and within minutes, you go from, I wonder what this could be, to, oh my God, what if something is seriously wrong with me? And suddenly you're reading the worst case scenarios, rare diseases, terrifying stories, conflicting opinions, the threads on Reddit, TikToks, medical articles, symptom checkers, and it's just your brain is spiraling. And now your anxiety is rising, your heart starts racing, and you become hyper aware of every situation in your body. And ironically, the more information you consume, the less clarity you actually feel. Because what most people don't really understand when they're looking for online, it's not necessarily information, it's reassurance, it's certainty, it's understanding. And the internet is actually kind of bad at providing those things in a healthy way. So today, I'm going to talk about why Googling symptoms affects anxiety so strongly and what happens psychologically and why more information often creates more fear, and how to approach health information without spiraling emotionally. Because this cycle is affecting far more people than we realize. And honestly, I think it's becoming one of the biggest emotional side effects of modern healthcare. One of the most important things to understand is this: you don't Google symptoms because they're irrational. You Google symptoms because uncertainty feels emotionally uncomfortable. And honestly, it's human, right? So when your body starts doing something unfamiliar, your brain naturally wants answers because our brains are wired to seek certainty when something feels threatening. And then that's when we notice pain, fatigue, dizziness, numbness, changes in our body, or unexplained symptoms. And so your brain immediately starts trying to answer one of the questions like, am I safe? And if healthcare has not yet provided clarity, your brain will go looking for it somewhere else, okay? And that's where Dr. Google enters the picture. And honestly, many of us are Googling because we feel alone in our symptoms, okay? Maybe the appointment was too short, or they just really forgot half of the conversation, or the explanation was, it just felt rushed, or the labs weren't explained clearly. We just don't understand what's happening. And so now the internet becomes a substitute for explanation, a substitute for reassurance, a substitute for understanding. Because at the core of symptoms, Googling is usually one emotional desire. I just want to understand what's happening to me. Now, here's where things start becoming emotionally dangerous because the internet is really good at giving us information, but it's terrible at giving us interpretations. And those are not the same thing. Because information will say, here are 500 possible explanations. Interpretation will say, Here's what's most likely relevant to your situation. And that distinction matters enormously because when you Google a symptom, you're not receiving clinical judgment, contextual assessment, emotional support, or individualized interpretation or probability analysis. You're receiving raw possibilities. And raw possibilities without context can become terrifying very quickly. So, for example, you Google headache, and now you're reading like 9,000 search results: dehydration, tension headaches, migraines, aneurysms, brain tumors, neurological disorders. And it's just like, whoa. But then the thing is, Dr. Google does not explain probability or nuance or context or severity appropriately. And so now your brain naturally fixates on the most dangerous possibility. Why? Because the brain is designed to prioritize threat detection. Your nervous system would rather overreact than overlook danger. So once you see the scary possibility, your attention locks onto it emotionally. And this gets even worse because of how online algorithms work, because the internet rewards engagement, emotional intensity, alarming headlines, shocking stories, dramatic experiences, not calm interpretation, not nuance, not emotional regulation. And that's why online health content often sounds like the symptoms doctors ignore, or the common symptoms could mean something seriously, or what nobody tells you about. Fear gets attention. And unfortunately, fear also keeps us searching. And so now, suddenly, your nervous system is activated while consuming emotionally charged medical information. And that combination is incredibly destabilizing. And here's another important problem: the internet cannot evaluate you. Dr. Google cannot assess your medical history, your risk factors, your medications, your age, your labs, your symptom patterns, your emotional state, or the broader clinical picture. So now you're trying to apply generalized information to your highly individualized body. And that rarely creates peace. Instead, it creates overload because now your brain is trying to process endless possibilities, conflicting opinions, uncertain outcomes, and worst case scenarios without any real framework for interpretation. And honestly, this is where many of us start emotionally spiraling. And it's not because we're weak, but because the human brain does not handle uncertainty well, especially around health. And another thing people don't realize is that information consumed under anxiety feels more convincing emotionally. So, what does that mean? It means the scary article feels true, and the worst case scenario feels likely, and that rare diseases suddenly feels possible, even if statistically it's extremely unlikely, because fear changes perception. And once fear enters the equation, your ability to interpret information calmly decreases dramatically. So now instead of understanding your health, you're trapped in an emotional threat scanning. And that's where very different mental state. It's a very different mental state. So this is where the cycle becomes a little bit more self reinforcing because once anxiety enters the picture, your relationship with your body starts changing. And this is incredibly important because when we become anxious about health, attention shifts inward and you start monitoring yourself constantly. And now you're suddenly noticing every sensation, every ache, every heartbreak. Every heartbeat, every twitch, every moment of fatigue, every physical fluctuation. And then things in your brain normally filters out automatically and now feel emotionally significant. And that is what we call hypervigilance. And hypervigilance changes how the body feels to you because attention amplifies sensations. And the more attention you place on your body, the louder the sensations start feeling. And then something very important happens. Anxiety itself starts creating physical symptoms. And then your nervous system is activated, which can cause dizziness, tightness, chest tightness, increased heart rate, stomach discomfort, muscle tension, sweating, tingling, shortness of breath, sleep disruption, and digestive changes. And now the symptoms are caused by anxiety because new symptoms to Google, okay, become the new symptoms to Google. And so the cycle feeds itself. You search because you're anxious. Then the searching increases anxiety, which increases symptoms, which leads to more searching. And over time, your body starts feeling unsafe to you. And that's the emotional cost of chronic health anxiety. Because now you no longer trust your sensations. You don't trust your nervous system or your ability to interpret what's happening calmly. And everything starts feeling potentially dangerous. And this becomes exhausting emotionally, especially because the internet never gives you closure because there's always another possibility, another condition, another story, another symptom overlap, and another terrifying article. And so now your brain never fully resolves the uncertainty. It just keeps searching for the next answer. And honestly, many of us get trapped here for years, quietly living inside this cycle of fear, of reassurance seeking, of symptom monitoring, and emotional exhaustion without realizing how much anxiety itself is driving the experience. Now, I want to be clear about something here. Now, this doesn't mean that symptoms are not real, okay? This is important because you may hear the discussions about anxiety and think, so you're saying it's all in my head? No. What I'm saying is the nervous system affects physical experiences profoundly. And fear changes how humans perceive, interpret, and experience their bodies. It's biology. It's not weakness. So, despite all of this, folks keep Googling symptoms. And why? Because temporarily it feels like control. And honestly, when people feel vulnerable, uncertainty feels intolerable. So searching creates the illusion that if I just learn enough, I'll finally feel safe. But what usually happens instead is temporary reassurance. You search, you read, you calm down briefly, then, boom, another symptom appears. Or another thought enters your mind, another sensation happens. And guess what? You're back online again, searching, what does this mean? This is why reassurance seeking can become emotionally addictive. Because for a brief moment, searching reduces uncertainty, but it never resolves the underlying fear permanently. So if the brain keeps returning to it over and over, you're not just searching for diagnoses, you're searching for emotional relief. Especially if you previously felt dismissed, misunderstood, or just unsupported in your healthcare settings. Because when you don't feel fully heard, what do? You go to the internet, right? And you're hoping to fill that emotional gap because the internet becomes a second opinion, the emotional backup system. And the thing that they turn to, you turn to this at like 1 a.m. when the anxiety rises. And I think it's important to acknowledge compassionately because most of us aren't Googling because we're dramatic. We're Googling because we're scared to protect ourselves, to regain clarity, and to feel safe again. And honestly, that's human, okay? And the problem is simply that the internet cannot truly provide the kind of grounded clarity that we're actually looking for because reassurance without understanding never lasts very long. And this is where many people get trapped between fear, compulsive information seeking, without ever actually feeling calmer. And so the goal is not to ignore your health. The goal is not to never research anything. The goal is learning how to engage with health information without emotionally spiraling. And there's a huge difference between awareness and obsession. Because awareness says, I want to understand what's happening. But obsession says, I must eliminate all uncertainty immediately. And those are very different emotional states. You don't need to panic to take your health seriously. And that's important because you're allowed to ask questions and seek clarity, monitor symptoms, navigate for yourself without catastrophizing every sensation in your body. Honestly, one of the healthiest things you can learn is this. Not every unanswered question is an emergency. Sometimes symptoms are serious, sometimes they're not. But immediately assuming worst case scenarios rarely creates better outcomes. It usually creates more fear. So here are healthier ways to approach health information. You track patterns calmly, use trusted sources, ask structured questions, notice emotional escalation, take breaks from searching, avoid doom scrolling, seek clarification from professionals, focus on probabilities, not possibilities, and most importantly, learn to recognize when anxiety is taking over interpretation. Because anxiety and anxious brains tend to interpret uncertainty as danger because that's normal, because it's not always accurate. And honestly, developing the ability to tolerate uncertainty calmly is one of the healthiest emotional skills you can build in healthcare. Because medicine is not always immediate, there are follow-ups, there's ongoing evaluations, there's monitoring and evolving answers over time. So that doesn't automatically mean catastrophe. And I think people deserve far more emotional support around this than they currently notice because you deserve clarity, you deserve grounded information, you deserve calm interpretation, and you deserve compassionate guidance, not constant fear. And people aren't Googling symptoms because they're irrational or anything like that. You go to Dr. Google because you feel confused, you're uncertain, you're scared, you're unsupported, you're desperate for understanding. And this is exactly why I built Alvora.health, because people deserve more than endless information loops. You deserve interpretation, you deserve clarity, organization, and guidance. And Alvora.health helps bridge the gap between raw information and meaningful understanding so you can better understand your labs, organize healthcare information, ask better questions, and navigate your health more confidently without constantly spiraling into fear. So if you've ever spiraled after Dr. Google, you're not weak, you're not dramatic, you're human. And we humans naturally seek certainty when we feel vulnerable. But clarity is healthier than fear. And better clarity leads to better understanding. So if you want help understanding your health information in simpler terms, download my free Clear Lab guide below, and it'll help you better understand common lab tests, what they actually mean, and what questions to ask next. Thank you.